Hi, folks. My name is Douglas Camp, and I'm a member of the San Luis Valley chapter of Trout Unlimited, and you're watching the Fly Tires Bench. This is installment number 4, the Quigley Emerger. This is a wonderful part dry fly, part nymph that works exceptionally well on selective trout, especially in the middle to the end of a hatch after the fish have been fished over pretty thoroughly by other fishermen, or if the fish are just full and picky. Now, this is what the Quigley looks like. And when it lands in the water, it sits with the butt straight down in the water, just the way I'm holding it, so that it looks like the nymph is suspended, holding on the surface of the water, which is what we call the meniscus, while the drake, the mature form of the nymph, almost mature, is climbing out of the old nymphal husk onto the surface to dry its wings. This is a great mayfly pattern. Now, one of the things I love about this pattern is you can tie it in a variety of sizes, from very large, size 8 for big drakes, all the way down to 16s for the smaller PMDs and for bigger Baetis mayflies. You can also substitute almost any color and material for it in a variety of ways. This is the same pattern, ties to size smaller. And you notice that the emergence section here is very white. This is white CDC, which is very waterproof. If it gets wet, it tends to make the fly buoyant right back up. And here we have a different body material, not pheasant tail, but actually peacock herl, dyed green, again with a grizzly hackle like the other two I just showed you. And this is green dyed CDC for the emergent mayfly. Some people will even tie this mayfly pattern with a stiff hair tail to make the pattern sit upright like a mature insect. And you still get the emergence effect with the hair sticking out. I think that's a good way to tie it, and if you're fishing very small or very riffled water, this can be very beneficial. But I tend to like this pattern tied in a manner with materials so that the tail sits in the water pretty thoroughly. Now, we're going to tie this fly on a TMCO 300 hook. You're going to need about a size 6 uni thread or an equivalent in brown, or a complementary color to the materials you're using. You're going to need about 3 to 4 nice peacock herls, some pheasant tail. This particular pheasant tail is dyed brown. Natural works great. Green, you could use black. And some really nice, very floaty grizzly hackle. Last but not least, some elk hair or deer hair or even Xylon to make the emergent part of the mayfly. Okay, let's push the vise up. I've got my hook in position. I have already pushed down the barb, and I am going to start tying the thread in about halfway down the shank of the hook from eye to bend. It doesn't have to be a super saturated coverage of thread, just a nice bed. And I tie it first down to the point of the hook, like so. And this is where I'm going to tie in my fine gold thread. It could be copper, it could be red for an accent color. You choose. I'm going to tie it in at this point, like so. Pull that wire away from the shank of the hook, so as I thread wraps, they slide back down the wire onto the shank. And I tie it down to basically where the barb of the hook would have been before I pinched it down. Okay. Now we're going to make the tail and the body of the mayfly out of pheasant tail. On this particular nymphal pattern, dry fly pattern, whatever, emerger pattern, I like it to have a short, stubby tail and a pretty thick body. So when I select my pheasant tail fibers, I'm going to come up here and take at least a 1/2 inch to maybe even 3/4 inch of fibers. Cut them really close to, I believe, the quill of the fly, that's what it's called, of the feathers. And I'm going to try to lengthen them closely to all about the same length. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's not, that doesn't need to happen. Then I'm going to clump them together between my fingers, and I'm going to tie in a very short, stubby little tail. Going to give it about 3 tight thread wraps, and you can notice, I hope, that those pheasant tail fibers have flared out into kind of like a fan. That's quite all right. In fact, I like that a lot. Now, we wrap our thread forward about to where we started it initially, and we take those pheasant tail fibers in our fingers and bunch them together into, kind of like a twine or a rope, and wrap them all at the same time forward up to where we stopped tying the thread forward. This little last part where you grab a hold of all those fibers and hold them up, straight up, so that you can wrap the thread over them will be your first bone of contention. You'll have to practice this. You can also use a hackle plier to wrap those forward sometimes. This is an old style one. But this doesn't always work as well as your fingers if you just practice with your fingers. Okay, I'm going to wrap those fibers down a little bit more, and then I'm going to take my nice sharp scissors and cut them off at the top. Now you notice that the body slightly increases in size up to that point. And we need to use this wire now to palmer wrap forward over the pheasant tail hackle to hold it in place as we fish with it. So if a fish's teeth catches it, it doesn't destroy the fly, or it just doesn't come completely unraveled. When I get up to the thread, I wrap the copper wire around it at least twice. And as I said, it's a gold colored copper wire. There's my 2 wraps. Okay, now I'm going to take my junk scissors and cut that wire. Don't ever use your good scissors to cut wire or lid tape. And now wrap forward just a little bit. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I'm going to straighten the tail a little bit. Okay. Now, I'm going to tie the emerging part of the fly, which is the hair that sticks out front in next. So I'm going to go to my elk hair. Doesn't need to be extremely long. It needs to be consistent in size and color. Doesn't even need to be exceedingly hollow. Most elk hair floats pretty darn good. And when I cut that hair and pull it off, you see there's lots of fuzzy stuff here in between the different strands of hair. And that's the warm under wool that keeps animals warm, if you will, when it's cold or when they get wet. And we want to take our hair comb and comb all of that out while we're holding the small ends of the fibers very tightly. This is going to allow that hair to pack in a hair packer, which I'll show you in a minute. And it's also going to allow you to get the tips nice and straight. Okay. Here's our hair packer. They come in lots of different shapes and lots of sizes, but on this fly, you do not need a big one. I take all of the tips and put them towards the bottom of the hair packer, like so. Many of you have probably done this, but for those of you who haven't, I'm going to walk it through a little slowly. And I'm going to tap that hair packer vigorously so that all the tips funnel down and end up in the same position. And I pull it apart, and there you have it, all the tips together. I'll pull them out. Make sure there's not any more hair. And then I'm going to try to trim the ends up just a little bit, not a whole bunch. And now we have to exchange these in our fingers. We take the big ends in our right hand and spin it around so that the little ends can now be pointing out towards the front of the fly and being held. Like so. Now, here's a good trick. Go ahead and quickly wrap that thread all the way up to the eye of the hook. Lay the hair on top of the shank of the hook. You want it to be about a little less than the length of the shank of the hook. Bring the thread up around the hair and circle under the hair, but not the shank of the hook once. And then come back down. And see how my thread has slid down? So what I'm going to have to do is wrap it around the hair again and then bring the thread up between my fingers and pinch it and hold it in place. Then we wrap the thread around the shank and we pull it tight once, wrap it around twice, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. Okay, that hair has gone crazy, but we're going to take care of that in just a minute. What we need to do next is pull the hair together a little bit and wrap our thread back onto the shank of the hook tightly until we know that hair is attached very permanently. Now we take our sharp scissors and we come in behind that clump of hair and we trim it off nice and smartly. Now right now, you've got most of the hard part of the fly done, but we need to do some important things. Remember, when we wrapped that thread forward up to the eye of the hook and then tied the hair in, we wanted that thread on the shank of the hook so the hair won't spin around. And if you look carefully, most of this hair didn't spin around. I had to hold it in place when I wrapped my thread around tightly, but because it was sitting on a thread base, it didn't slip. Now you see this little puffy patch of hair? I'm just going to wrap my thread back down there and I'm going to wrap the thread around it and push it down. Just collapse it. And if there are any extra hair fibers or things sticking around, I'm going to clip those off without clipping my thread. Okay. Now we need our pheasant, or not our pheasant, but our peacock fibers. So I think 3 is going to get us on this particular fly. So I've got the 3 ends together. I'm going to go back down, about halfway down the shank of the fly, and I'm going to tie these in with about 3 thread wraps. Notice the thread is split now from where I tied the peacock herl in to where the hair extends out, about halfway. Wrap the peacock fibers forward, just like you would a pheasant tail nymph. Then wrap the thread over to secure it. About 3 times. Okay, see those fibers? They're not going anywhere. Now we need a really good hackle fiber. About exactly the size that you would use if you were tying this as a dry fly. So that means the hackle needs to extrude from the shank of the hook past the tip of the hook or the point of the hook just a little bit. We're going to tie it with just one fiber right now. As a beginning tyer or someone first time tying this fly, I suggest you just use one hackle fiber. But as you get good, you'll learn to put in two, and then you'll be able to make that fly float even better in rough water. So I've come down to where I think the fibers are about the right size. I've peeled the barbules off so that I have a blank piece of the feather to tie in. Now I'm just going to push these pheasant tail fibers out of the way with my fingers and tie that dry fly hackle in with about 4 to 5 wraps. Okay, so here's the hackle. Here's the peacock curls. Now we're going to continue tying the peacock curls forward, up to the eye of the hook, tie them off. You only use about 2 wraps of thread. Clip off the excess. And now we are going to wrap the hackle around the hook, just like it was a standard dry fly. Wrap it all the way up to the eye of the hook. Take your thread, come over it once, twice, 3 times. Now you've noticed that as we were tying in those other fibers, this hair up front started to squeeze down a little bit. We want that to happen. Now we're going to take our scissors and very carefully clip off the hackle and take your whip finisher now and whip finish on top of those last thread wraps right behind the eye of the hook about 1, 2, 3 times. I even added 4, and then tighten it and cut your thread. Now, this may look like the eye of the hook when you get it out of the vise is crowded a little bit. But in actuality, what you can do is when you tie this fly on, you can just pull the hair back a little and get the tippet right into the eye of the hook. Then take your glue, because this fly will come untied unless you glue it. Put a little glue on the top of the fly, not on the bottom where the eye is at. And there you have the Quigley emerger tied in a pheasant tail nymph style. Super easy, efficient fly tied in various sizes and colors. All right, my name is Doug Camp, and you've been watching segment 4 of the Fly Tyers Bench. Hope you come back and see more videos. Bye-bye.